Our special guest is Dr. Lee Ostler. And as I said, some of you would have seen him on the ASEA 5, which has become a very, very popular broadcast every week. Lee is trained as a dentist and dental practitioner, and he's now he's on the ASEA Medical Board, has a lot of wisdom to share around our technology and what it can do for us on a very practical level. So, Dr. Lee, are you with us?
I am. It's a pleasure to be with you in the great down under, or wherever from around the world you're dialing in. My name is Lee Ostler, and I live in the state of Washington in the United States. I've lived here most of my life. And I've got an interesting story to tell, and I think I'll just go ahead and start my slide presentation. I was asked to come on to provide some scientific or not so much product knowledge, but more of the science side of this. And so I hope I don't bore some of you, but every once in a while, I think we need to hear, kind of what's going on with regards to ASEA and the redox biology area. I've titled this "Connecting the Dots Between Redox Biology and Health." As you know, we have a disadvantage with ASEA in that it's really difficult to speak to science as it relates to our product and obviously specific disease conditions, or even to be able to explain it with regards to how it can solve those kind of problems. So we have to go a little deeper and get into the redox biology side of it, and hopefully that will make more sense as we go along. To start, I'd like to just introduce myself, and I'd like to do that by introducing you to my wife. This is Stephanie. The picture on the left of the screen is not long after we were married. That's 35 plus years ago. At the time, she was, very healthy and beautiful, and she still is, and she's just a wonderful person. This image on the right was about, as I recall, 2005. But something happened in her body along this time frame that began a long process of ill health. For probably the last 3 decades, she's really suffered from a lot of health issues. And so in about 2018, in April 26th, to be exact, this is a picture of her. You can see the effects just in her appearance, and she was pretty beat up. I won't go into detail with what her health conditions were, but it's multiple surgeries, a lot of endocrine problems, tumors, and so on and so forth. And that was in April of 2018. And on October 11th, we were sitting in her physician's office, and I'm kind of half complaining, half reporting, and just like she's plateauing. What else can we do? We've been everywhere. We've had multiple interventions from anybody and everybody we could see, from both sides of the medical aisle, traditional and alternative. And our wonderful physician, who's an MD, has his PhD in pharmacology. He kind of takes all the tough cases in our region. And he said, after I asked him, I said, "What else can we do?" And he said, "I think you need to get her on some redox signaling molecules." And I remember looking at him and I said, "What is that?" And he said, "Just go Google it and get some." And that was where it left. That was on the 11th of October. And 2 weeks later, on the 25th, I actually found some, and she started taking it. This was 3 weeks later, November 15th. The week prior to this, I had been in Las Vegas at a professional meeting. I'm a past president for the American Academy for Oral Systemic Health, and our annual science meeting was in Vegas. We had a dual meeting with the American College for the Advancement of Medicine. Some of you may know Dr. Avi Hershowitz, who's in San Francisco. He was president of that other organization, and we had a dual meeting, and their whole track was on issues of cellular detox, gut health, redox biochemistry, and so forth. And I spent the whole weekend on the medical side of the meeting learning what they were learning about. So I came home. This was now, 2 or 3 weeks into this. And then about 2 weeks later, she was feeling so good, we decided to go on a date. And so this was December 1st. So you can see the time intervals here was pretty short, but it was an amazing transformation. And as I looked at this, and especially as I began to look at the pictures that we'd taken, my jaw dropped and I thought, what is going on? You know, it was the honest, you couldn't ignore this. And I am just, I guess, scientifically OCD enough that I have to know why. I have to know, you know, where the molecules involved, where are the electrons moving? And again, I didn't really know much more about redox except for what I could gain online. I had just purchased this retail from somebody I didn't even know. At that time, my physician was not really into this. He'd just heard about it, and I think he was kind of grabbing for straws and sending us out the door, quite frankly. And later, he kind of acknowledged that, but we both had a little bit of faith in it. And so anyway, this was where it started for me because I realized I couldn't deny what I was seeing. And so I dived into the science, and we're going to take a little bit of a trip down that path a little bit. And it really starts with an understanding of oxidation and oxidative stress and what this redox or reduction oxidation thing is all about. So let me just start with the basic definition here. Oxidation it is the state of missing an electron. And so you'll see on the top left, there's a reducing agent that has an extra electron that it's going to donate to that green molecule on the bottom that becomes the oxidizing agent. And so we're going to give it up as we go across in this reaction where the reducing agent becomes oxidized and the oxidizing agent becomes reduced because it accepted the electron from the reducing agent. This is the basic redox equation of all biology, of all botany, of all organic and inorganic chemistry. It's this concept of electrons, you know, going from a reduced state to an oxidized state and back and forth. We have common experience with that. We've all seen this in our own life. If we leave a wrench or, you know, some metal out in the yard, it becomes rusted. We cut apples or bananas or potatoes. We can, on the kitchen counter, you can see the effect. If you just leave it out in the air, it becomes oxidized. And of course, we know, you know, what we can do to prevent that is to place some lemon juice or citric acid or any other product that has that is a reducing agent that has these electrons, and that keeps the fruit fresh or the potatoes fresh because it's keeping it away from oxygen and the harmful effects of oxygen. Well, in the body, the same type of rusting occurs. We call it oxidative stress or biological rusting, if you will. And it has an effect on aging and all sorts of neurodegenerative diseases, inflammatory diseases, cardiovascular diseases, you know, musculoskeletal. The list goes on and on. But this is happening inside the body. And if we back up and we start to look at this and say, well, why is this happening and how do you solve it? Because all we see is this tree, and we're looking at the leaves and the branches, and these are the symptoms that we complain about. These are the signs that we show to our, you know, our family and our physicians and say, well, you know, I've got this disease, this sickness that's exhibiting or presenting. And basically we spend the rest of our life, you know, crawling around in the canopy of this tree with the various different types of disorders, trying to abate or get rid of or mitigate the symptoms that are affecting our life. So back to the redox side of this, what we understand now is this is about the redox state or the oxidative state, oxidative stress in the cell, and it's really a balance between the reactive oxygen species, which are oxidants, those molecules that are missing an electron, and the reductants that are around us that are called that have an extra electron, and it's the balance between these and the presence of these energetic free radical molecules, which have a tendency to want to do damage. And so the whole point of this conversation is we want to achieve a balance, or what we call homeostasis, between the two sides, between the oxidized side and the reduced side. And this isn't like a one-to-one. We don't need, one reductant molecule for every single oxidant molecule. It's not a one-to-one ratio. It's more of a functional and responsive balance, which is what the theme of the comments here are going to be. The source of these reductants in life are either endogenous or exogenous. The endo and the exo just means it's either coming from inside or from outside the body. If we started at the very beginning, this is the source of all energy. We call it bioenergetics in the plant kingdom. The plants use a process called photosynthesis. There's little inside in the plant cells. There's little things called. I just drew the blank on me, but it's a molecule, or it's an organelle inside the plants that synthesize cellular carbohydrates and structural objects that we call the plant or the tree or the whatever it is, that is taking carbon dioxide out of the air and mixing it with nutrients that it gains through the soil, and in that process it gets rid of oxygen. And so we show up now, and we meaning animals and humans and mammals and so forth, we eat those plant sources, and we use oxygen through a process called glycolysis and fatty acid metabolism in an organelle in our cells called the mitochondria. And because oxygen is involved, we call this respiration. And so this cellular respiration utilizes oxygen, and in the process, it creates reactive oxygen species and a very important molecule called ATP. And ATP is the energy molecule that our bodies use that drive all of our cellular processes. We get rid of carbon dioxide, which is what we breathe out, and that recycles. And so this is kind of the cycle of life in the plant, the chloroplast, that's the organelle in the plant, and the mitochondria in mammals or humans and animals. We're digesting and we're extracting the stored energy in these various things that we eat and digest in order to sustain life. And that's the whole process. Another view of this is looking at the cell. You can see here, this is the cell is taking oxygen and a food source, and through this process of respiration, it's breaking that down, and these spinning portions of Krebs cycle on the electron transport chain create this ATP, and then this byproduct called ROS, or reactive oxygen species, which are the oxidants and the free radicals. If we wanted to even get a little more scientific, this is what every biology student learns in their high school and college and doctoral classes. This is Krebs cycle, and it's a very busy picture here. But you'll notice in the red circles, in each of those, there's a little blue molecule identified as NADH. And these NADH molecules are responsible for being reductants that allow oxidation to be dealt with in this cycle. We're going to break this down a little bit more simply. Again, we've got the glucose through the process of glycolysis, and fatty acids enter Krebs cycle and this electron transport chain in the mitochondria using NADH and FADH2. Those are just acronyms for these complex biochemical molecules. But the bottom line here is they're making this ATP. On the right side, you'll see the same thing structured differently, and that's just showing that oxygen is combining with hydrogen to produce water. And again, because oxygen is the ultimate electron acceptor. And this whole process, the bottom line here is this whole process is creating the ATP energy and these oxidant or reactive oxygen species molecules. And this is the basic biochemical, reaction of everything in life. Now, one of the important things here about this process, because this will start to make sense as we apply it to the bodies, I want to introduce one other concept here, and you'll see this merge in just a moment. And that has to do with what a rheostat is. This is where a current comes into a little electrical device in a circuit, and the wire gets wrapped around this central component, and I can slide that top slide contact point up or down this wire, and I can vary the amount of current that is passing through this system and going to the outflow. We see this is a common thing for dimmer switches. You know, if you wanted to dim your lights to adjust, you know, the amount of voltage and amperage going out. But this is an electrical concept. We're going to now tie this into the biology side. This is kind of a busy slide, but the important things to look at here are the antioxidant defense on the left is maximized, and on the right side, there's an oxidation level that's maximized. As we go from left to right, as you look at this, on the left side, we have base, or what we call physiological ROS levels. This is low oxidation. On the right side, we have severe oxidation. In the middle, fittingly enough, there's mild or moderate oxidation. The question is that when in the cell, these reactive oxygen species that are created, what happens to them, what happens because of them, is all a function of how the cell processes are responding to those different oxidative states. And it all happens through this process that we've all come to know and love called redox signaling. You'll notice on the left side, if I have normal or physiological healthy oxidation levels, it's healthy for my cells. On the right side, I'm going to actually have cell death or apoptosis or necrosis. And in the middle, there's going to be some adaptive type responses. And this is where redox signaling really shines, because redox signaling is about detecting the problem and being able to respond to it in a way that can create survival and an optimum functional status in the cell. Autophagy is just a process there on the bottom. That means as I'm moving from a healthy homeostasis to a more sicker cell, a disease cellular process, I get cell death on the right, and autophagy is just really the process of how the cell deals with dysfunctional cell parts or cells altogether. Another view of this, this is a little more complicated, but I'm drawing a couple of science articles out in terms of redox biology, and then we'll synthesize this in a more simple illustration. Again, on the left, I've got redox signaling because there's low levels of oxidation. In this science article, they talk about hydrogen peroxide representing that. And on the right side, there being high levels of oxidation stress. And what's interesting is I filter down through this illustration or the schematic to the bottom, you'll see at the very bottom, there's that survival and that apoptosis or cell death at the bottom on a sliding scale. The one interesting thing about this, and those who may recall the 2019 Redox convention in Las Vegas and hearing Tyler Norton talk about the future of redox, where he was talking about the future of ASEA, he talked about energy, that redox energy was really what our future was all about. Well, here's a science article showing that when I have on the left side, I have adequate redox signaling, I'm going to have high levels of this ATP energy. And when I have oxidative stress on the right side, I'm going to have more cellular destruction, and I'm going to have low or no amounts of ATP energy being created. This is I stumbled into this slide, this piece of literature about a week ago, and it has really captivated me into this thinking. It's like, I just would love to be a fly on the wall of where ASEA might be taking this. To simplify and bring these two together with this rheostat idea, the rheostat is a sliding scale that can dial in a certain response and give an output based on the amount of current that is going on. And so this term rheostat, we're adopting this now called the redox rheostat, where again, this is a composite of the previous information where I have low oxidative state in a cell on the left side. We call that good stress or eustress. We have high oxidative state on the right where there's high distress. And again, that mild or moderate level of oxidative stress and mild distress. And that translates down, you can see the overlay of high antioxidant and high oxidation left and right respectively. But at the bottom for each of those, we have high ATP energy on the left, good homeostasis balance, and the cells proliferate. And when I have mild to moderate, there's an adaptive response because I'm sensing or detecting what's going on in the cell, and the cell dials in a response to that based on where that sliding scale is. And that's the defense signaling. This is where the antioxidants show up, and I get cell survival or cell repair. And on the right side, obviously, this is where low energy, I've got oxidative damage occurring to cells and cell membranes, and I get more cell death. And so the question here becomes, the point I wanted to bring up here was to note the relationship between the low stress, high energy side and the high stress, low energy side. Again, you just park this in the back of your brain a little bit and you watch what's going to happen over the next few years, because we're going to be talking about, this is my prediction, we're going to be talking about energy, cellular energy, as much as we're going to be talking about cellular defenses, in my view. So where ASEA comes in is we can call this the ASEA Redox rheostat. This is the process or the mechanism of action of how a cell knows what its state is, how to read that state, and how it properly responds so that the cell knows to do what it was instinctively designed to do. When ASEA comes in, it pushes us to the left where we have higher antioxidant defenses, and we renormalize and rebalance this homeostasis or this homeostatic balance between the oxidants and the reductants in the cell. Again, this is really basic, redox biology that's happening here. So here's some redox questions. And the first one is, how does a cell know it is under stress? How does a cell know to do something about it? And what happens in this response? I put the word know in quote marks because it obviously isn't thinking about this. This is not a cognitive process. This is a very reactive situation. It's all biochemistry. It's all the concentrations of molecules and atoms that have different or varying amounts of positive or negative charges on them. And we know that an oxidized state, an oxidized cell, has more positive charges associated with it. And when the reducers come in, the antioxidants come in, they're helping to neutralize and stabilize that condition so that it is not oxidized anymore. Well, as we translate this again, we've all seen this type of a presentation many times in our ASEA journey. This is another more plain way of illustrating what we were just looking at in the science articles, where on the left side, you've got this oxidative balance or homeostasis, everything's happy. Then when oxidation begins to occur for whatever reasons, this could be because of our environment, radiation, hypoxia or low oxygen levels in the cell. It could be toxicity, environmental pollution, as well as aging. All of that creates a level of oxidation that then begins to set up a signaling that dials in a redox response in order to save the day, and that this happens through gene expression. If you've looked at the ASEA gene study summary, this is what we're talking about, is this gene expression and what causes it to happen. The materials and labor, you've no doubt heard Alan Noble talk about this. This is one of the great analogies and metaphors of this whole conversation, is that while we can have great amounts of extracellular or exogenous antioxidants coming from plant-based sources in our diet, we can have enzymes, we can take vitamins, we can take minerals, we can do all of this lifestyle stuff. It still requires a signal It requires a director, it requires a choreographer in order to set it all in action and to actually activate the gene expression. And that whole process from a science point of view is what makes what we have so special. Now again, here's a science slide. You've got your homeostasis site on the left and oxidative state on the right. We've all heard about the NRF2 if you've studied the gene study at amazingmolecules.com. You'll read about the NRF2 gene, and I'm going to focus on that specifically here. The NRF2 gene is the antioxidant gene, and when it is activated, it codes for the production of antioxidants inside the cell, the endogenous or intracellular antioxidants that are made by our own DNA. But on the left side, you'll see there's a molecule called KEAP1. That's just an acronym for a very long name, but the KEAP1 and the NRF2 proteins stay together, they couple together, and when they're together, NRF2 is not activated. It's just floating around, coming in and out of existence as it's made or degrades. But all of a sudden, you'll see there in the middle, we have an elevation or a movement towards oxidation, or an oxidative state occurs. And the KEAP molecule is very sensitive to that, and it lets go of the NRF2 molecule, which activates it, and it moves, or we call it translocates, to the nucleus, where it complexes with the ARE, which is the antioxidant response element sitting on the gene, and it activates that process where now I have proteins being developed. Those proteins are the glutathione and the superoxide dismutase and other antioxidants that then come back out into the cytoplasm to deal with the ROS, the free radicals and the oxidants. It is now, these are reducing agents that lend their electrons to these reactive molecules, and it reverses that arrow. And when it reverses the arrow and I go back into a balanced homeostasis, then NRF2 becomes inactive because it reassociates with the KEAP molecule. And this process goes on trillions of times. It goes over and on and on. It's ongoing. And this is how our cells know how to respond when there is an oxidative state that is created because of any of those conditions we talked about earlier in our environment or through toxicity and so forth. So again, in summary, when our cells become oxidized, there's more oxidants than there are reducing agents. This shift towards an oxidative or redox state activates NRF2, which then goes and creates the antioxidant response, creating glutathione and SOD or superoxide dismutase that then come back in and correct the problem in the cell. This is a responsive thing, as opposed to exogenous antioxidants that come from plants, foods that we eat. Those we just top load in. Those aren't responsive. They're just there or they're not there. But this intra or endogenous source of antioxidants are created on demand. They're created as we need them. And of course, as we all know, as we age, the ability to create redox molecules is less, which is what we're going to talk about in this next slide. Again, a little bit busy, but I'll walk you through this because this is an important one. Pardon me. So you'll see there's a cell there, and there's a mitochondria in it, and there's the reactive oxygen species in the yellow. And so what happens is the mitochondria making energy creates these reactive molecules that are the reactive oxygen species. And these reactive oxygen species, the reason why they're bad is they create inflammation and oxidative damage. They do that through a little signaling pathway called the NFKB, or the nuclear factor kappa beta pathway. All you need to know is that this is an inflammation pathway that creates these inflammatory proteins called cytokines. And those go throughout the body and they create more inflammation. It kind of feeds itself. That's a byproduct of these reactive oxygen species being made in the cell. The redox signaling molecules, you'll see there in the middle, are a derivative of these ROS. There's a large number of ROS molecules, and some of those are not very healthy, and some of them are very healthy. That gives rise to the idea that ROS has a dual character to it. The redox signaling molecules that come off of those ROS have an effect that we just talked about, which is to activate the NRF2 pathway. It's a low-level oxidation that creates that freed up NRF2 that then goes to that DNA that then creates the phase 2 antioxidants, or the intracellular antioxidant, glutathione and SOD. So as we take this apart a little bit more, on the left, you'll notice that we're now going to introduce redox signaling molecules as a supplement. These go directly into the cell, creating that very special level of oxidation, that physiological level and low-level oxidation that purely upregulates the NRF2 activity that creates the antioxidant response, creating the antioxidants inside our cells. The third part of this is, you'll notice that in the red rectangle at the top, we've got diet, exercise, we have bioenergetic and oxidative therapies. This is lifestyle. This is exercise, this is good sleep, this is stress reduction. You can also get this through lasers and magnets, anything that's oxidative, biophotonic, or anything like that. The reason why these healthy lifestyle measures work to make us healthy is that they're activating the mitochondria to make more energy. They're biooxidative. They go back to that respiratory chain. And in the process, they're creating more reactive oxygen species, which creates more redox signaling molecules, which creates more NRF2, which creates more glutathione. And so anytime we do anything to increase or improve our lifestyle through better sleep, better diet, better exercise, stress reduction, and so forth, we're tapping into this very same pathway that's activating NRF2. We come along in ASEA with a redox signaling molecule supplement. I will call it a replenishment because we're just replenishing what the mitochondria is not making as much of as we age or have disease. And by replenishing that, we are activating one side of this, the NRF2 antioxidant pathway, and we are diminishing the NFKB inflammatory side of this. And that's why we have a great claim that we can make, that this moderates the inflammatory response. This is the reason why. The schematic explains that away. But as importantly, it also explains why these lifestyle measures work to keep us healthy. They are playing on this very same pathway, except they're doing it through the mitochondria and indirectly creating native redox signaling molecules that go into the same pathway. So one more thing about the biooxidative. This is the healthy lifestyle thing. These include everything from ozone, exercise, magnetic fields, hydrogen peroxide, lasers, chlorine dioxide, vitamins, nitric oxide, low-level laser therapy, fasting, biophotonic biostimulation, good nutrition, herbs. I know there are other companies out there that claim NRF2 activation through herbal compounds, and it is true. This is why, and this is how they're playing on this same pathway. The difference is that they have to accept all of the other ROS oxidation downside that's occurring because they're playing the game through the mitochondria. So with that bit of science, we'll kind of back this out and just come back to this basic concept, and then we can open this up for questions if there are any. In life, most of our focus in life and on maybe quite a bit, unfortunately, the healthcare side of the equation are looking at symptoms. When you go to the doctor, you're going to report or complain about your discomforts. They might see some lab values. You had an event. You're just not feeling well or something, and the reason why is because there was at the root of this whole problem, the cellular health was not very good. And so what ASEA helps us to do, what good lifestyle, especially when we combine ASEA with good lifestyle, is we're able to combine those both and activate the healing capacity at the root cause level so that we have a root solution level, so that everything downstream from that starts to auto-correct. It starts to correct at the cellular level, and then the symptoms go away. It's important that we understand that ASEA does not heal. It does not diagnose. It does not treat. All it's really doing, I'll say that in quote marks, all it's really doing is it's correcting the cellular imbalances in these metabolic pathways, and it's activating what I call the inner doctor. The doctor is in when redox signaling is activated. And in our discussion just now, we've really only talked about one of those pathways. There's multiple genetic pathways that become signaled or activated. But this is the one that we talk most about because it deals with that the NRF2 gene and the intracellular antioxidant response, which is like the redox rheostat. That's how our bodies know when there's a problem. The redox response signals the gene expression activation in response to those problems, and the cell can then respond in appropriate ways to mitigate or to rebalance, to go back to homeostasis, and so forth. So that's a quick trip through probably some concepts that we don't hear a whole lot in ASEA, but that's kind of the science behind it. That's the redox biology. Glenn mentioned earlier that there is a book that's coming out on this. It's titled Redox Matters, Connecting the Dots Between Redox Biology and Health. That should be coming out sometime this summer when it gets finished up. So we'll have all the details of everything we just talked about, as well as many other concepts that relate with the principles of redox signaling, but at the redox biology level. I would just say this, I go back to my initial comment about the lack of the kind of science that we want. So the kind of science that we can't generate are the random controlled trials that prove that ASEA works, just like we hear all the anecdotal case study stories, that are all definitively about ASEA redox treating all those or explain exactly how, without really going into the redox biology and understanding how these electrons move about. The good part of all this is more background information for you folks or anybody else watching. This is the redox biology explanation of this redox rheostat. I hope that becomes a well-used term going forward. This is how the body knows how to respond, when to respond, and in what fashion to respond, and when to quit.